The scent of fresh roses filled the air. Sunlight streamed through the sheer white curtains, casting a golden glow over the bridal suite. The dress, her dream dress, hung elegantly by the window, shimmering in the morning light. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Until her phone buzzed. Sleepily, she reached for it, her heart fluttering with excitement. She expected a sweet message from her soon-to-be husband, maybe something about how he couldn't wait to see her walk down the aisle. Instead, her breath caught in her throat as she read the words that shattered her world. "I'm sorry. I can't do this." Her hands trembled. She blinked, rereading the text over and over, hoping, praying, it was a mistake. But it wasn't. The man she loved, the man she was supposed to marry in just a few hours, was gone. Her heart pounded as she dialed his number. No answer. Then a knock on the door. She turned, half expecting him to walk in with an explanation. But it wasn't him. It was her sister, eyes wide with something that looked too much like pity. "You should sit down," she whispered. Dread coiled around her spine.
"What?"
"Just tell me," she demanded, her voice raw. Her sister hesitated before finally saying the words that would change everything. "He didn't leave alone." The room spun. He ran away with Lauren, her maid of honor, her best friend.
Gone.
Together. The bouquet slipped from her fingers, petals scattering like the remains of her shattered heart. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. The weight of betrayal pressed against her chest, crushing her. First, her fiancé. Then, her best friend. The two people she trusted the most had walked away, together. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced them back. She wouldn't break. Not for them. Instead of walking down the aisle, she walked out of the wedding venue, her chin high, her heart shattered but not destroyed. The next few months were the hardest. The pitying looks, the whispers, the endless questions. But she refused to let heartbreak define her. She threw herself into her career, working harder than ever. Late nights at the office, early mornings chasing goals, anything to keep her mind occupied. The pain didn't disappear overnight, but slowly, she built something stronger, herself. She landed a major promotion, started a side business she'd always dreamed of, and for the first time in years, she felt free. And then, when she least expected it, someone walked into her life. At first, she didn't notice him, too focused on building her empire to care about romance. But he noticed her. The way she carried herself with quiet strength. The way she smiled even when her eyes held a trace of sadness. He wasn't pushy. He didn't try to fix her. He just stayed, offering laughter, companionship, and something she hadn't felt in a long time. Trust. Love came slowly, gently. Not like a whirlwind, but like a steady flame, warming her heart piece by piece. And one day, she realized she had healed. Not because of him, but because of herself. He was just the beautiful surprise she never saw coming. The headlines had been brutal. Runaway groom leaves bride at the altar, with her best friend. The whispers at work, the sympathetic looks from family, and the unsolicited advice from strangers. It had all been suffocating. But instead of crumbling, she fought. She quit her old job, the one she had settled for out of convenience. Instead, she pursued her real passion, launching her own business. Long hours, endless sacrifices, but it was hers. Slowly, her name became respected in the industry. Clients sought her out, her company grew, and the same people who once pitied her now admired her strength. But just as she thought she had her life perfectly under control, Arthur happened. Arthur wasn't part of her plan. He wasn't a distraction she had time for. And yet, from the moment they met, he unsettled her. Their first encounter was unexpected, a business networking event she had attended reluctantly. He had been standing by the bar, confident yet relaxed, his dark eyes scanning the room with quiet curiosity. She hadn't noticed him at first, but he had noticed her. "You look like someone who'd rather be anywhere but here," he had said, amusement lacing his voice. She turned, ready with a polite smile, but something about him made her pause. His presence was steady, unbothered by the noise around them. I'd rather be working, she admitted. He chuckled. Workaholic. Focused, she corrected. Arthur grinned. Focused is good. Until it makes you forget to live. She had dismissed him then. Just another charming man with smooth words. But he didn't disappear. They kept running into each other, at events, at coffee shops, even at the bookstore she frequented on quiet Sunday mornings. And slowly, despite her resistance, she found herself looking forward to their conversations. Arthur was different. He didn't pity her, didn't treat her like a fragile woman recovering from heartbreak. He challenged her, made her laugh, and never once pushed for more than she was ready to give. And that terrified her. Because for the first time in a long time she felt something real. Arthur wasn't supposed to matter. She had built her life carefully, brick by brick, ensuring that no one had the power to shake her again. But Arthur didn't try to knock down her walls. He just made her question why she had built them so high. Their interactions remained casual at first. Coffee meetups that weren't quite dates. Late-night phone calls that started about work, but somehow drifted into laughter and long silences that weren't uncomfortable. And then, one evening, everything changed. It was raining, a sudden downpour that turned the city into a blur of shimmering lights. She had been working late at her office when her phone buzzed. Arthur, still at work? She hesitated before replying. Yes.
Why?
A few minutes later, her office door swung open, and there he was, drenched from the rain, holding 2 takeout bags. I figured you hadn't eaten, he said, stepping inside as if he belonged there. She stared at him, something warm curling in her chest. Arthur, you didn't have to. I know, he said simply, setting the bags on her desk. But I wanted to. And that was Arthur. Never pushing, never demanding. Just showing up, in the quietest yet most significant ways. It wasn't until she ran into her ex-fiancé and ex-best friend that she realized just how much she had changed. She hadn't seen them since the wedding disaster, hadn't wanted to. But fate was cruel, and there they were, laughing at a fancy restaurant she had walked into for a business meeting. For a brief second, the pain threatened to resurface. The betrayal, the humiliation, the heartbreak. But then, she felt a warm hand on her lower back. Arthur. He had followed her gaze, his expression unreadable. But he didn't say anything, didn't fill the silence with meaningless words. He simply stood beside her, steady and sure. And that's when she knew. She had moved on. Not because she had forgotten. Not because the past didn't hurt, but because it no longer had power over her. She turned back to Arthur and smiled. Let's go, she said, walking away without sparing her past a second glance. And Arthur followed, because that's what he always did. He stayed. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. Her business was thriving, her life had regained its balance, and Arthur was a constant presence, steady and unwavering. But she was afraid of letting someone in again. Afraid that if she allowed herself to feel, to love, she would only end up broken once more. So she kept her distance, even as Arthur lingered at the edges of her life, always patient, always waiting. Until the night everything changed. It was a charity gala, one she had been invited to as a guest speaker. Dressed in an elegant black gown, she walked into the grand ballroom with confidence, her head held high. Arthur was there too, but this time, he wasn't by her side. Instead, he was standing across the room, engaged in conversation with a group of business executives. And she hated how much she noticed his absence. Halfway through the evening, a familiar voice made her freeze. Well, look who it is. She turned, her stomach twisting as she met the smug gaze of her ex-fiancé. He was alone this time, his usual confidence laced with something else, regret. You look good, he said, giving her a once-over. Better than I expected. She arched a brow. And what exactly did you expect? That you'd still be heartbroken over me. He smirked. She let out a soft laugh. You really think too highly of yourself. His smirk faltered, but before he could respond, a familiar warmth settled behind her.
Arthur.
She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. The moment he placed his hand on the small of her back, a quiet reassurance spread through her. "Everything okay?" Arthur's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. Her ex's gaze flickered to him, his expression souring. "And who's this?" Arthur didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her, his eyes asking a silent question. "Do you want me to step in?" She held his gaze for a second before turning back to her ex. "This," she said, lifting her chin, "is the man who stayed. The man who didn't run. The man who didn't betray." Her ex opened his mouth, but she didn't care to hear another word. She took Arthur's hand and walked away, not once looking back. Later that night, as they stood outside under the soft glow of city lights, Arthur turned to her. "You didn't have to say that," he said quietly. She met his gaze. "But I meant it." A beat of silence. And then, softly, hesitantly, she whispered, "Arthur, I'm scared." His expression didn't change, but his hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "I know," he murmured, "but I'm not going anywhere." Her chest tightened. For so long, she had been holding herself back, afraid to trust, afraid to love. But standing here, with Arthur's warmth surrounding her, she realized something. She wasn't scared of falling. She was scared because, deep down, she already had. And for the first time, she wasn't running away. She was ready to let love in. Falling in love with Arthur wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It wasn't the kind of love that came crashing in, burning everything in its path. It was steady, safe. A love that felt like home. Days turned into weeks, and without realizing it, she had allowed Arthur into her life in ways no one else had ever been. From late-night conversations to quiet Sunday mornings where they simply existed together, he had become a part of her world, one she didn't want to lose. But love wasn't just about feeling safe. It was about choosing. And when Arthur's past came knocking, she realized that she wasn't the only one who had fears to overcome. It started with a phone call. She had just finished a business meeting when Arthur's name flashed across her screen. But instead of his usual calm greeting, his voice was strained. "We need to talk." The words sent a ripple of unease through her. Arthur was never the type to be vague or distant. When she met him at his apartment, he was already waiting for her, leaning against the balcony railing. His hands were in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "Arthur, what's wrong?" she asked, stepping closer. He exhaled. "I got an offer." Her heart skipped a beat. "An offer?"
A job.
"Overseas. A major company wants me to lead their expansion in Europe." Silence stretched between them. She should have been happy for him. This was an incredible opportunity. But all she could think about was what it meant. "You'd have to move," she said quietly. Arthur nodded.
Yes.
"For at least a few years." Her stomach twisted. "Have you decided?" He hesitated. "I wanted to talk to you first." She swallowed. "And what do you want, Arthur?" His eyes met hers, steady and unshaken. "You." Her breath hitched. "I won't take it if it means losing you," he continued, voice softer now. "But I need to know if this, we, are something real to you. If we're just something temporary, tell me now and I'll go." Tears pricked at her eyes. Not because he was leaving, but because for the first time in her life, she had a choice. She could run like she always did, stay guarded, pretend she didn't care, and let him walk away. Or she could choose him, choose them. And for the first time, she knew exactly what she wanted. She didn't answer him that night. Instead, she spent hours thinking, remembering. All the times Arthur had been there, without question. The way he had stood by her side, never pressuring, never demanding. He had chosen her every single time. Now it was her turn. The next morning, she walked into his apartment without knocking. Arthur looked up from his coffee, surprise flickering across his face. She took a deep breath. "Take the job," she said. His brows furrowed. "What?" "Take it," she repeated. "I don't want you to give up something amazing because of me." Arthur set his cup down, studying her carefully. "And what about us?" A small smile tugged at her lips. "I'm not going anywhere, Arthur." Relief flashed in his eyes, but she wasn't done. You asked if we were real, she whispered, stepping closer.
And we are.
So go take the job. We'll figure it out. A slow smile spread across his face before he reached for her, pulling her into his arms. You're incredible, you know that, he murmured. She closed her eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Maybe love wasn't about staying in one place. Maybe it wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic ultimatums. Maybe it was just about choosing the same person over and over again, no matter where life took you. And she would choose Arthur. Every single time. Distance was never easy. But true love had a way of making the impossible work. With Arthur in Europe and her business expanding in the city, their relationship wasn't conventional, but it was theirs. And months later, when Arthur returned, when he got down on one knee with the city lights glowing around them, she knew. This wasn't just love. This was forever. The day Arthur returned, she knew something had changed. He looked the same, tall, confident, with that steady presence she had come to rely on. But there was something in his gaze, a quiet certainty, that told her he had made a decision. She just didn't realize what it was until he got down on one knee. They were standing on the rooftop of her apartment, the city lights twinkling below them. The air was crisp, carrying the distant hum of traffic, but all she could hear was the rapid beat of her heart. Arthur reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. I've been waiting to do this for a long time, he said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. She felt breathless, frozen in place. I love you, he continued. And I don't want distance or time or anything else to stand between us again. I don't care where we are as long as we're together. He opened the box, revealing a simple yet elegant ring, one that wasn't extravagant, but perfect. Marry me, he said. Not because it's the next step, not because we're supposed to, but because we belong together. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. For so long, she had built walls around herself, afraid of getting hurt again. But Arthur had torn them down, not with force, but with patience. She didn't need time to think. She had already made her choice. A slow smile spread across her lips as she whispered, yes. Arthur exhaled a breath he didn't realize he was holding before slipping the ring onto her finger. And when he stood, she didn't wait. She threw her arms around him, pressing her lips to his. This was it. Not the fairy tale she had once imagined, but something even better. A love that stayed. Their wedding wasn't grand. She didn't want a spectacle, and Arthur had only one request, that it be intimate, just the people who truly mattered. So, on a breezy autumn afternoon, they exchanged vows in a small garden surrounded by close friends and family. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a golden glow on everything it touched. As she stood before him in a simple yet elegant white dress, she realized something. This wasn't just a wedding. It was proof that she had healed. That love, when given to the right person, wasn't something to fear. When Arthur said his vows, his voice was steady, filled with love and quiet devotion. And when it was her turn, she met his gaze and promised the one thing she had once been afraid to say. I will always choose you. And with that, they sealed their forever. Years later, as she stood on their balcony, watching the sunset with Arthur's arms wrapped around her, she realized something. Life wasn't perfect. There were challenges, arguments, and unexpected obstacles. But through it all, Arthur remained the same. The man who stayed. The man she loved. And as she rested a hand over the small curve of her stomach, feeling the gentle flutter of new life growing within her, she smiled. Because this wasn't just a love story. It was the beginning of a family. And it was only the start of forever.